keep saying you'd like to see a plan for vaccine distribution. In your view, what needs to be in that plan? What would you like to see?
Well, you'll have to watch our debate tomorrow. I think we'll be asking for timelines for each of the possible vaccines, approval when they'll be received, what the rate of use is expected. Will we be getting 50,000 in the first few weeks? We need a timeline. We'd like to see a specific federal plan for the federal areas of healthcare responsibility, the military, Indigenous Canadians, perhaps some issues with veterans, and really the supply chain. So, you know, the Pfizer vaccine is minus 70. We really don't have national freezer capacity. They won't answer those questions. So how can we make sure that we are ready to receive the vaccine, because the companies won't give it if it's going to be spoiled. So the plan, you know, all the other countries of the world are rolling out their plans. Some will be getting vaccines shortly. Canadians deserve at least to head into Christmas knowing there's a plan.
No, this idea that Canadians are at the back of the pack or that we're behind everybody else. I mean, all things being considered in the world, where is it realistic for Canadians to sit? I mean, who says we should be first in line? What about poorer countries where the rates of infection are higher? What about...
Well, I think it's good we're ordering, you know, this portfolio of vaccines they're talking about. Obviously we don't need 10 vaccines for every citizen. We will participate in helping other parts of the world get it. But we need to make sure Canadians have access. Why did they double down on a plan with China first to manufacture a Chinese CanSino vaccine here? That, I think, was a fundamental mistake by the government. They won't answer questions on that. So tomorrow we're going to have a debate. We're going to hopefully have some of the questions asked. Thank you.
Bien, je pense que s'il y a une position sur laquelle on est clair depuis des semaines, c'est évidemment la question des vaccins. On a de cesse de réclamer le plan pour la vaccination. Il est clair que pour nous, les conservateurs, les vaccins, c'est important et on demande un plan au gouvernement. Ce qu'on constate malheureusement, c'est que le gouvernement a très mal agi encore une fois là-dessus. Le gouvernement a d'abord fait travailler avec une compagnie chinoise qui finalement a fait patate. Résultat, on a pris du retard, ce qui fait que dans quelques jours, les Britanniques auront accès aux vaccins, puis nous, on ne sait toujours pas quand est-ce que les Canadiens vont pouvoir être vaccinés. Et ça, c'est en raison du fait que le gouvernement a fait des mauvais choix, comme il a fait des mauvais choix sur les tests rapides.
No, I don't personally think that they should be mandatory. I think that, people who want to receive a vaccine should receive one, and it's too bad that the Liberals' lack of planning has resulted in Canadians going to be delayed months. I heard today that the UK is going to start vaccinating next week, and the US in 2 weeks. But for us, next September, it's awful.
Your colleagues, Derek Sloan's petition is calling on the government to not make them mandatory, to stuff like that. Do you think it's fair?
You know what? It's the first I've heard about his petition. As I said, I think that, it's to the choice of Canadians if they want to receive the vaccine or not. Some people have concerns that there's no long-term testing on the vaccine. That's a concern. Thanks.
I think that what we've heard is that Canadians want to know when they're going to be able to get vaccinated. And right now there's no plan from the government even to be able to do that. Next week we're going to see the United States, the European Union, the UK, they're going to start vaccinating their population. We're seeing that by the end of the first quarter, the promise from the Liberals is that we'll have 6 million doses, which is about 3 million vaccinations, but with spoilage of 20%, it's 2.5 million people by the end of the first quarter. So they're going to have to prioritize who are getting the vaccines, and I mean, it doesn't look like there's going to be enough vaccines for the people who want them, but we're going to have to see a plan from this government on who's going to get it and how they're going to deliver it, and once we see that, then we'll be able to make determinations about how the economy is able to open back up. But Canadians are really focused on their lives and their livelihoods. Without a plan from this government on how they're going to get vaccines to Canadians.
Your colleague is focused on whether or not they think you mandatory. There was a petition submitted by one of your colleagues calling the government to make sure that it's not mandatory, and some other concerns about the safety of vaccines.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that petition, but.
Mr. Sloan,
Can you explain to us about your petition?
Why don't you catch me after? It's getting late.
We have time now. We have time now.
Much better to get the answer right from the member then. Have a great day, everybody.
On sait que la Grande-Bretagne va commencer sa vaccination dans une semaine. Au Canada, on n'est pas prêt. Mais est-ce que ça... Pourquoi ça fait vraiment une différence qu'on soit premier ou pas? Ça change quoi, dans le fond?
Ben, c'est pas une question d'être premier par rapport à d'autres pays, mais c'est que le plus vite qu'on va avoir les vaccins, le plus vite qu'on va pouvoir réouvrir l'économie. C'est-à-dire, là, les gens actuellement, il y a plusieurs commerces sont fermés, les gens sont confinés, ne peuvent pas voir les amis, la parenté. Donc, à partir du moment qu'on va avoir un vaccin, qu'on va être vacciné, on va pouvoir ressortir, reprendre notre vie normale. C'est ça qui presse. Fait que moi, je sois avant tel pays ou tel pays, c'est pas ça qui m'importe. C'est que nous, on veut être libérés et pouvoir reprendre notre vie. C'est ce qu'on veut.
Est-ce que le vaccin devrait être obligatoire dans certaines conditions? C'est-à-dire, si on veut prendre l'avion, si on veut aller voir un spectacle?
Ça, je ne commenterai pas là-dessus. Par contre, je crois que l'important, c'est de prendre conscience de la réalité. La réalité, actuellement, c'est que tout est arrêté, tout est fermé compte tenu que c'est ce virus-là qui est là. Puis, à partir du moment où les gens vont avoir accès au vaccin, ça va être la façon de se libérer de tout ça. Merci.
The House of Commons has to pass the medical assistance in dying legislation by December the 18th. You only have 10 sitting days left. How feasible do you think that is? And are you amenable to extending the sittings if you have to?
Well, what we have said since day one is that the government is the owner of the agenda. So those are the ones who decided to prorogue the House and then to start the debate later. So obviously, if the government has not decided to prorogue the House, well, we would have plenty of more parliamentary day to address this issue. This is a very important issue. We have to address it correctly, and being correct is to let people express themselves at each and every stage. That's exactly what we are doing, but we are not responsible for the agenda. The government is responsible for that. They are the one who prorogued the House. They are the one who tabled the bill a few days after. So if for them it was a top priority, which was the case, by the way, well, they should have done that differently. And now, if we are at this dead end, or not, can I say that? We are very close to the decision process. Well, the responsibility belongs to the government, not for us. We are doing our job. The job of the government is to be sure that we have plenty of time to do our job. And well, this is where we are now. The question is to ask to the government, not to us.
And the second part of that, of course, is that I think on December the 11th, the motion that allows for the hybrid sittings of the House and for committees, that's going to expire.
Yes.
What's your take on whether it should be renewed as it is, or will you be again returning to a fight for full in-person?
Well, first of all, when we talk about for the fight of full in-person, it was as long as we have to respect the health recommendation. It's not 338. It belongs to the decision of the health system, but we have discussion on that, obviously.
We're still digging through the legislation, but one of the things that's interesting is the government's telling us that they don't need to pass the legislation before the end of this parliamentary session, that they only need to introduce it. However, there is a child benefit of $300 that would be deposited in bank accounts of Canadian families on January the 20th that, as far as I understood, would require legislative passage before it happens. So the government, not to get too deep into the archaic details, the government needs to tell us how it plans to make that payment if it doesn't have the legislation passed. So, but on the subject of the legislation itself, it is here. It has been, I understand the notice has been given. I think you're telling me it's now been formally introduced. But we're carefully reading it to make sure it does what the government claims.
This idea, of course, that it's going to be a confidence vote, I mean,
I don't think there's a lot of drama in that. It's a fiscal package. Typically, those are confidence votes. So I don't see any reason why that would lead to an election.
Childcare piece of it all. I mean, you've been out sort of on social media the last couple of days sharing some of your thoughts. I know the Conservatives have struggled before with this idea of a national childcare plan. Who gets to make the decision? But you know, COVID has shown us that childcare really is essential to get women in particular into the workforce. So what do you do? What is your response to that?
Right. Well, this is a recycled promise that the Liberals made in 1993, 1997, 2000, 2004. They've been in office for almost 2 decades in total time period since they originally promised this. And the reason they've never delivered it is because they're trying to take money from parents, give it to the federal government, which gives it to the provincial governments, which gives it to the municipal governments, which gives it to an agency which supposedly assigns parents a daycare space. And despite billions upon billions of dollars spent on that complicated enterprise, it hasn't actually delivered a program in all of those years. So that's why Conservatives have always proposed giving childcare dollars to parents and then letting them decide. Some would choose institutional daycare, others choose private care. Some choose to have, many new Canadians like to have a grandparent provide care in the home. There are still Canadians who believe in having a stay-at-home parent, a totally legitimate option. All of those options should be available to Canadians. It's not Justin Trudeau's right to take away parents' childcare dollars and tell them how it will be spent. I should also point out the irony of this is that this proposal they have right now doesn't actually create any childcare spaces. It creates a secretariat. So again, more bureaucracy, more middlemen, sopping up government tax dollars, while parents, if they had that money themselves in their own hands, would definitely spend it on the betterment of their own kids. That's why it's always better to trust parents with their kids rather than politicians.
But what if they can't get a spot, though? I mean, like whose responsibility is it at the end of the day to find that spot, to create that spot?
Right. Let's remember why there was a shortage of spots. It's because of the COVID shutdown. It wasn't, and the reality is COVID shut down daycares, shut down my family daycare because kids weren't able to go, understandably so, and childcare workers needed to protect themselves as well. That was the real problem with childcare during the COVID closure. So the solution to that is to have a resilient, strong system that makes sure that everybody can make their own choices. But during the COVID closure, the institutional daycares had to close for public health reasons, and that's why people couldn't get childcare. Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, Mr. Sloan,
Hello.
thank you so much. So we read the petition that you put in the House of Commons. Do you support what your petition is calling for? Because oftentimes you could table these petitions and you don't necessarily have to agree with it.
Yeah, so my typical practice when it comes to petitions, if I get a lot of emails on a certain subject, somebody comes forward with a petition, I usually support it. On this particular petition, in all honesty, I haven't read it since I tabled it there a couple of weeks back. I think there's some good points in there. I'd obviously have to look at every single point to tell you if I agree or disagree. But my general philosophy is, petitions are another way to give constituents and Canadians a voice. They feel that they can get some answers from the government. And so unless I'm adamantly opposed to, a particular petition, if I'm hearing on it, and I've received hundreds of emails just with various concerns about, the government's response to COVID and just questions. And I think questions are good, and I think that hopefully we'll see more clarity on that moving forward.
So there's some good points in it. What are some of those good points that you've seen so far?
Well, off the top of my head, there's one point that talks about making sure that any advisory committees don't have any pecuniary interest in the pharmaceutical industry. So, off the top of my head, I think that's a good one.
Okay, what about making the concerns around mandatory vaccines? Is that something that you are concerned about, that the government might try to make this a mandatory vaccine?
Well, I was on the technical briefing call that we had yesterday on vaccines, and the doctor there, I believe, Dr. New, was on there. He was speaking very clearly that the vaccine would not be mandatory, and I think that would help to assuage concerns that certain people have.
And the petition seems to be raising concerns about whether or not the vaccine will harm Canadians. Is that something that you share?
Well, I think that as far as I remember the petition, I feel that they were raising concerns about maybe what the different protocols will be in place in terms of testing protocols. And I think those are good questions. Now, again, I'm not an expert on what protocols there are or what protocols there should be. And frankly, my guess is the person who sponsored this would be happy to speak to you about it. But I'm not certainly not an expert on the subject matter of what protocols are, what protocols there shouldn't be. But for people who want to know about those protocols, I think they have every right to ask.
But are you concerned with the Health Canada process? Are you concerned that this might not be a safe vaccine?
Well, I think my concern more stems to the fact that there's a lot of questions that are not being answered in terms of just the process surrounding this generally. And like I said, I'm not an expert on what is or isn't being done, but frankly, our entire party has been asking tons of questions that are frankly going unanswered when it comes to
the safety of the vaccine.
Well, our party's asking questions about the rollout and things like that. Yeah. But I think that if somebody wants to ask, hey, we're in a crisis situation where obviously we want to approve treatments as quickly as we can. But on the other side, we need to make sure that we have people saying, are all safety protocols being followed? Now, me personally, like I said, I'm not an expert on this subject matter, so I can't say one way or the other whether certain protocols are being followed. But I believe these people seem to have concerns, and I have no problem allowing them to raise those through a petition in the House of Commons.
Will you be taking the vaccine?
The COVID vaccine?
Yes.
Well, I think that it'll be incumbent upon all Canadians to.
But will you be taking the vaccine if one is approved by Health Canada?
Well, I think that I will make my decision based on information that comes out, and we'll see when it happens. I mean, we're still not certain when the vaccine will be here, and our party's been asking many questions on that very issue.
Yeah. Do you have any debt from your leadership campaign?
I do not.
You do? No debt.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you for that question. Appreciate it. Okay.